The first signs were subtle, like hairline fractures in fine crystal, barely visible until the light hits them just right. I should have noticed sooner, but success has a way of blinding you to the obvious. 25 years of marriage, a thriving architectural firm, and a reputation as Seattle's power couple had lulled me into a false sense of security. I, Daniel Morrison, had built my life like I designed my buildings, with precision, careful planning, and an eye for lasting stability. Or so I thought. It started with Luna's new yoga routine, 6 a.m. classes, 3 times a week. Nothing unusual for a woman approaching 50 who wanted to maintain her enviable figure. I admired her dedication, the way she seemed to glow after each session, her dark hair damp with exertion, those yoga pants hugging curves that still made my breath catch after all these years. But something felt off about the timing, the way she'd check her phone more frequently, smiling at messages she'd quickly delete. Just the girls' group chat, she'd say, that familiar dimple appearing in her left cheek. You wouldn't understand all the drama, darling. And I'd nod, returning to my blueprints, ignoring the nagging voice that whispered about how those classes never seemed to coincide with any social media posts from her usual workout friends. My friend Marcus, over one of our weekly Scotch sessions at the downtown cigar lounge, was the first to voice what I'd been refusing to acknowledge. Danny, he said, rolling the amber liquid in his glass, when was the last time Luna attended one of your project unveilings? The question hit me like a slap. I couldn't remember. She'd always been there before, proud and radiant, her presence making every success sweeter. Work had been demanding lately. The Morrison Tower project was my magnum opus, a 50-story marvel of sustainable architecture that would reshape Seattle's skyline. Luna understood the pressure, she said. She'd been so understanding lately, in fact, that our intimate moments had become increasingly rare, replaced by quick pecks and distracted love yous as we passed like ships in our own home. The first real crack appeared during Sarah Chen's gallery opening. Sarah, one of our oldest friends, had finally achieved her dream of opening her own art space in Pioneer Square. Luna arrived separately, citing a late lunch with her sister Patricia. She looked stunning in a black dress I'd never seen before, her neck adorned with a delicate silver necklace I didn't recognize. When I moved to put my arm around her waist for a photo, she flinched almost imperceptibly before leaning in with a practiced smile. Beautiful piece, isn't it? Sarah commented later, watching Luna examine a large abstract canvas. Almost as interesting as that necklace your wife's wearing. The artist who made it has quite a unique style. She paused, giving me a long look. He only sells through private commissions. That night, I lay awake watching Luna sleep, studying the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way the moonlight painted shadows across her face. 25 years of shared dreams, 3 miscarriages before we accepted our childless fate, countless victories and defeats weathered together. Could it all be unraveling because I'd been too busy reaching for the sky to notice the ground shifting beneath my feet? The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. While Luna was at her yoga class, I opened her laptop. She'd left it on the kitchen counter, unlocked. A rookie mistake for someone who'd recently become so protective of her phone. The browser history was meticulously cleared, but Google's autocomplete betrayed fragments of searches, divorce lawyers Seattle, separate bank accounts, and most damning, how to tell your husband. The screen blurred as my coffee went cold beside me. Outside, Seattle's perpetual rain painted gray streaks across the windows of our penthouse, and somewhere in the distance, a ferry's horn sounded, a mournful note that seemed to echo the hollow feeling spreading through my chest. I closed the laptop and straightened my tie, muscle memory taking over as I prepared for another day at the office. But as I stepped into the elevator, my finger hesitated over the lobby button. I'd built my career on attention to detail, on seeing the patterns others missed. It was time to apply those skills to my own life, to follow the threads of these invisible cracks to their source. I pressed the button for the parking garage instead. Sometimes the most devastating earthquakes start with the smallest tremors. And like every architect knows, once you spot the first crack in a foundation, you have to decide quickly, shore it up, or watch everything you've built come crashing down around you. Following Luna that morning felt like an out-of-body experience. I'd spent decades designing spaces that brought people together, yet here I was, skulking through Seattle's rain-slick streets, becoming a stranger in my own life. The irony wasn't lost on me, an architect of connection, now mapping the geometry of betrayal. My Tesla, usually a source of pride, felt like a liability as I maintained distance from Luna's Range Rover. She didn't drive to the yoga studio. Instead, she wound through the Victorian-line streets of Queen Anne, finally parking near Kerry Park. I watched her step out, her lithe figure silhouetted against the morning fog that wrapped Seattle's skyline like a lover's embrace. She checked her reflection in the car window, adjusting her hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times across our dining table, in our bedroom mirror, before countless social events where we'd played our parts as the perfect couple. A man was waiting by the observation deck, tall, probably mid-40s, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having your foundations shaken. He wore a leather jacket that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his salt and pepper hair artfully disheveled. When Luna approached, he didn't just hug her, he enveloped her, his hands tracing paths across her back that spoke of intimate familiarity. My stomach clenched as she melted into his embrace, her body language more genuine than anything I'd seen from her in months. I gripped my steering wheel until my knuckles went white, fighting the urge to storm over there, to demand answers, to shatter their little romantic tableau with 25 years of accumulated rage. But I'd learned long ago that the strongest structures are built on careful observation and meticulous planning. So I forced myself to watch, each moment burning itself into my memory like acid etching glass. They walked to his car, a Porsche 911, because of course it was. The way she slid into the passenger seat suggested this wasn't their first time. As they drove off, I followed, maintaining a careful distance through the morning traffic. They headed north, eventually pulling into the private garage of a boutique hotel in Belltown, the Archer, one of my firm's recent projects. I designed that building, crafted every angle, chosen every material. Now it was hosting my wife's infidelity. I sat in my car for an hour, alternating between numbness and nausea. My phone buzzed with messages from the office, meetings, deadlines, the 1,000 little urgencies that had seemed so important yesterday. Now they felt like artifacts from another life, one where I still believed in the stability of carefully laid plans. When I finally walked into the hotel lobby, the manager's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Morrison. What an unexpected pleasure. Is there anything I can help you with?" I smiled, channeling years of professional polish. "Just curious about how the space is working out. Mind if I take a look around?" The lie felt smooth on my tongue, a preview of the many deceptions to come. The security footage was easy to access. After all, I was the building's architect, concerned about traffic flow patterns. The truth unspooled in grainy black and white. Luna and her lover had been meeting here twice a week for months. Room 1504, every Tuesday and Thursday morning. The timestamps aligned perfectly with her yoga classes. But it was what I found next that truly gutted me. A quick search revealed her lover's identity, James Connor, CEO of Rising Tide Development. They were our biggest competitors, currently bidding against us for the waterfront renewal project, a contract that could make or break my firm's future. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity: the cleared browser history, her recent interest in my project files, the late-night phone calls she took on the balcony. I left the hotel in a daze, walking aimlessly through streets I'd helped shape. Every building seemed to mock me now, monuments to a man who thought he could control his world through careful design and planning. Rain had started falling again, harder now, and I welcomed it, letting it mask the heat building behind my eyes. My phone buzzed again. "Luna, thinking of picking up sushi for dinner. That new place you mentioned?" The casual domesticity of it, the sheer audacity of her performance, crystallized something inside me. I'd spent my career creating spaces that would stand the test of time, understanding that sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing exactly where to place the pressure points that could bring everything down. I texted back, "Sounds perfect. Had an interesting meeting today. Can't wait to tell you about it." The response was immediate, "Can't wait to hear all about it, darling." I smiled, but it wasn't the expression that had graced countless publicity photos and charity galas. This was something newer, harder, the smile of a man who'd just discovered that the most devastating earthquakes aren't the ones that strike without warning, but the ones you deliberately set in motion. Back in my office, I opened my project files, especially the ones for the waterfront bid. Then I made 3 calls, one to my lawyer, one to my private investigator, and one to the FBI's white-collar crime division. If Luna and James wanted to play games with building empires, I'd show them what happens when you try to demolish an architect's life without understanding the structural weak points you've created in your own. Rage, when properly channeled, becomes its own form of architecture. In the week following my discovery at the Archer, I constructed elaborate scaffoldings of revenge, each level carefully engineered to support the weight of my wounded pride. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Luna thought she was dismantling my life, she was actually providing the foundation for her own undoing. The FBI agent, Catherine Wells, listened to my evidence with professional detachment in a downtown coffee shop far from my usual haunts. "Corporate espionage isn't just about stolen blueprints, Mr. Morrison," she said, stirring her Americano with mechanical precision. "It's about patterns of behavior, establishing intent. Your wife's involvement adds a layer of complexity we don't often see." I watched Rain trace familiar patterns down the window, remembering how Luna used to trace similar paths on my chest in our more intimate moments. "Everything's about patterns," I replied, my voice carrying an edge I barely recognized. "The key is understanding which ones are intentional and which are unconscious betrayals." The private investigator's report landed in my inbox that evening, a digital Pandora's box of devastation. James Connor hadn't just seduced my wife, he'd orchestrated a systematic infiltration of my life. Photos showed Luna leaving his office with documents, her yoga bag conspicuously full. Text message transcripts revealed conversations about project specifications, bid numbers, material costs. They'd turned our marriage bed into a corporate war room, and I'd been too blind to see it. But it was the other discoveries that truly hollowed me out. Luna had been methodically moving money for months, small amounts, nothing suspicious in isolation, but forming a pattern as clear as the steel beams I used to support my towers. A separate apartment in her name, paid for in cash. Consultations with divorce attorneys who specialized in high net worth separations. She wasn't just planning to leave, she was preparing to erase herself from the foundations of our life together. That night, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the artifacts of our shared life. Photos from our wedding, our travels, our triumphs, each one now a carefully curated lie. I poured myself 3 fingers of the 30-year-old Macallan she'd given me for our last anniversary, appreciating the bitter symmetry. The scotch burned, but not as much as the realization that every kiss, every tender moment of the past year had been performed with the precision of a professional con artist. Marcus called, his voice thick with concern. "Danny, you missed the contractor meeting. That's not like you." "I've been redesigning some aspects of my life," I replied, watching ice melt in my glass like the last vestiges of my naivety. "Listen," he hesitated, "there's something you should know. Connor's been making moves. Not just professionally. He's been seen with other wives in our circle. Luna might not be his first architectural survey." The glass shattered in my hand, scotch and blood mixing on imported marble. The pain felt clarifying, real in a way nothing else had since the Archer. I watched the red droplets pattern the floor, forming their own kind of blueprint, a design of destruction and rebirth. Luna found me cleaning up the mess, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Daniel. What happened?" She rushed forward, reaching for my hand with the same fingers that had probably traced patterns of desire across James Connor's skin hours earlier. I pulled back, watching confusion flicker across her features. "Just a moment of clarity," I said, wrapping a towel around my cut palm. "Sometimes you have to break something to understand its true structure." She frowned, that familiar dimple appearing, the one I used to find endearing, now just another tool in her arsenal of deception. "You're working too hard, darling. The waterfront project is consuming you." "Projects have a way of taking on lives of their own," I agreed, meeting her eyes with a smile that didn't reach mine. "Speaking of which, how was yoga?" "Invigorating," she replied smoothly. "Jennifer's really pushing us to explore our edges." I nodded, noting how easily the lie fell from her lips, wondering how many thousands of similar deceptions I'd swallowed over the years. "Edges are interesting things," I mused. "They're where all the important transitions happen. Where things either hold together or fall apart." Later, as she slept beside me, or pretended to, I opened my laptop and began to type. Not the angry emails or desperate confrontations she might have expected, but something far more devastating, a series of carefully worded letters to the SEC, the state licensing board, and several key clients. Each one a precision-guided missile aimed at the foundations of James Connor's empire. Luna had taught me an invaluable lesson: the most effective demolitions look like accidents from the outside. As I worked through the night, I felt something crystallize within me, a new structure rising from the ashes of my former self, its architecture both beautiful and terrible in its potential for destruction. Chapter 4, The Weight of Shadows. There's a peculiar emptiness to watching someone you love perform intimacy. I'd become a connoisseur of Luna's fabricated affection, cataloging each false note like an architect noting stress fractures in a failing foundation. Her morning kisses, once natural as breath, now felt choreographed, performances staged for an audience of one. My responses had become equally artificial, a mirror reflecting back the precise wavelength of deception she projected. The SEC investigation into rising tide development was proceeding with the inexorable patience of geological forces. I'd learned to appreciate slow devastation, the way pressure builds beneath seemingly stable surfaces, waiting for that crucial moment of collapse. James Connor's empire was beginning to show hairline cracks, visible only to those who knew where to look. Stock prices fluctuating in microscopic tremors, whispered concerns in boardrooms, nervous investors making discreet inquiries. But it was Patricia, Luna's sister, who unexpectedly altered my carefully plotted trajectory of revenge. She appeared at my office unannounced, her face carved with the kind of determination that reshapes landscapes. "You know," she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from my desk. The Seattle skyline spread behind her like a metallic tapestry, my legacy written in glass and steel. "About James. About everything." I studied her face, searching for hints of complicity. "And you're here because?" "Because this goes deeper than you realize, Daniel." She placed a USB drive on my desk with the delicate precision of someone handling explosives. "Luna isn't just helping James steal your designs. She's helping him destroy you. But she's not the architect of this plan, she's another blueprint being followed." The drive contained emails, dating back 3 years. I read them as the sun set behind the Olympic mountains, casting my office in gradients of blood and shadow. The truth emerged like a structure slowly revealed by excavation. James Connor had orchestrated similar scenarios with other industry competitors. Luna wasn't his first corporate seductress, she was merely the latest iteration of a proven strategy. He'd groomed her, manipulated her, exploited the microscopic fissures in our marriage until they became canyons of betrayal. "Your wife," Patricia's voice cracked slightly, she convinced herself it was about passion, about finding something she'd lost. "But James, he selected her because of you. Because you rejected his partnership offer 5 years ago. This was never about love, it was about systematic destruction." The revelation should have devastated me. Instead, it filled me with a strange, crystalline clarity. I'd been targeting the visible structure of Connor's empire, when I should have been examining the hidden foundations of his methodology. That evening, I waited for Luna in our kitchen, watching her prepare dinner with the precise movements of someone who'd learned to hide in plain sight. The way she handled the knife, chopping vegetables with mechanical efficiency, reminded me of how skillfully she'd carved away at the bedrock of our life together. "I saw Patricia today," I mentioned casually, observing how her rhythm faltered for a microsecond, a nearly imperceptible tell, but I'd become fluent in the language of concealed reactions. "Oh." Her voice maintained its practiced lightness. "How is she?" "Concerned." I sipped my wine, a Bordeaux from the year we were married. "About choices. About consequences. About the weight of architecture we never intended to create." Her knife stilled completely now. "You're being cryptic, darling. More than usual." "Am I?" I moved behind her, close enough to smell her perfume, Chanel No. 5, her signature scent, though lately it sometimes carried undertones of unfamiliar cologne. "I've been thinking about structural integrity. How the most devastating failures often come from hidden weaknesses, deliberately introduced." She turned to face me, her composure perfect except for a slight tremor in her left hand, the tell she'd never managed to eliminate in 2 decades of poker games. "Daniel. It's fascinating, really," I continued, taking the knife from her unresisting fingers. "How someone could mistake being a weapon for being a warrior. How easily we can convince ourselves we're writing our own story when we're actually following someone else's blueprint." The color drained from her face as understanding dawned. But before she could speak, my phone buzzed, a text from Agent Wells: "Connor's making moves. Emergency meeting needed. Your office, 1 hour." I placed the knife in the sink, its metallic click against the steel basin echoing like a gavel's fall. "I have a late meeting," I said, straightening my tie. "Don't wait up." As I stepped into the elevator, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in its polished walls, a man transformed by the alchemy of betrayal, reconstructed from the ruins of naive trust into something harder, more dangerous. The pieces of my counterstrike were aligned like load-bearing beams, each one positioned to ensure maximum structural failure of Connor's carefully constructed scheme. But as the elevator descended, Patricia's words echoed in my mind: "Be careful, Daniel. Sometimes when we think we're demolishing our enemy's structures, we're actually detonating charges in our own foundation." Agent Wells's revelations hit me like successive tremors, each one destabilizing what little solid ground I had left. The conference room in my office felt like a confessional box, sterile and unforgiving under fluorescent lights that turned everything the color of old bones. "James Connor isn't just running corporate espionage," she explained, spreading photographs across my desk like tarot cards spelling out an inevitable doom. "He's orchestrating a complete takeover of Seattle's development landscape. Your firm was just one target among many. But you." She paused, studying my face with the clinical interest of someone watching a controlled demolition. "You were special. Personal." The photos told a story I hadn't been prepared to read: James with other architects' wives, other men's lovers, each scenario a perfectly choreographed dance of seduction and betrayal. But Luna's file was different, thicker, more detailed, stretching back years before their first chance meeting. "He's been watching you since you rejected his partnership," Wells continued, her voice cutting through my spiraling thoughts. "Learning your patterns, your weaknesses. Luna wasn't just selected, she was groomed, manipulated, convinced that her dissatisfaction in your marriage was deeper than it actually was." My fingers traced the edge of a particularly damning photograph: Luna entering a therapist's office 3 years ago. The same therapist, I discovered, who had connections to Connor's network. "They reconstructed her memories," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Reframed our entire history." "Professional manipulators don't just exploit existing cracks," Wells confirmed. "They create them. Plant seeds of doubt, water them with carefully crafted moments of discord, harvest the resulting devastation." I thought of Luna's gradual transformation over the past few years, how her warm spontaneity had slowly calcified into something more constructed, how her laughter had become a performance rather than an expression. I'd attributed it to the natural erosion of time, but now I recognized it as intentional deconstruction. The night air on my office balcony carried the salt tang of Puget Sound, a reminder of permanence in a world suddenly liquid with betrayal. Below, Seattle's lights mapped out territories of influence, some mine, some Connor's, all now pieces in a game far more complex than simple corporate rivalry. My phone buzzed. Luna. Coming home soon. I made your favorite pasta. The domesticity of it gutted me anew. How many of these moments had been genuine, and how many had been tactical moves in Connor's long game? The lines blurred like city lights in rain. I called Marcus instead of responding. I need everything you have on Connor's therapy connections, I said without preamble. Every client, every session, every goddamn coffee break for the past 5 years. Jesus, Danny, he breathed. You're talking about protected medical information. That's not just illegal, it's nuclear. So is psychological warfare disguised as marriage counseling. My voice had taken on the same hardness I used to specify blast-resistant glass. He didn't just steal my wife, Marcus. He reconstructed her. Rewrote her memories of us until I became the villain in her story. The silence on the line stretched like shadow across evening concrete. Finally, there's a record specialist I know. Former client. Owes me for some creative refinancing during his divorce. But Danny, this kind of excavation. You might not like what you find beneath the foundations. I thought of Luna's face earlier that evening, the microscopic flinch when I'd mentioned Patricia, the way fear had flickered behind her eyes like heat lightning. Not fear of being caught, I now realized, but something deeper. Fear of the structure of her reality being questioned. Back in my office, I opened my project files, not the current ones, but archives stretching back years. Every building I'd designed contained elements of my relationship with Luna, the curve of a roof inspired by her smile, the flow of spaces echoing the way she used to move through rooms. Connor hadn't just attacked my marriage, he'd targeted the very source of my creative power. I pulled up the plans for his latest project, the one Luna had been feeding him information about. In the sterile glow of my monitor, I began to see patterns I'd missed before. His designs weren't just incorporating stolen elements from my work, they were weaponizing them, turning my architectural signatures into monuments of mockery. The realization crystallized like frost on glass: to truly destroy Connor, I would need to do more than expose his corporate espionage. I would need to dismantle the elaborate psychological architecture he'd constructed around Luna, brick by painful brick. But could I do it without destroying what fragile genuine foundations might still exist between us? My phone buzzed again. Agent Wells this time, new information. Connor's team is moving on the waterfront project tomorrow. Whatever you're planning, the window is closing. I stood at my office window, watching my reflection overlay the city I'd helped build. The man looking back at me was a stranger, sculpted by betrayal into something harder, more dangerous than the trusting architect I'd been. But as I mapped out the coordinates of my counterattack, a new fear took root. In my quest to demolish Connor's house of lies, how much of myself would I have to destroy? In architecture, there's a moment just before demolition when the building seems to hold its breath, a suspended instant when the past and future hover in perfect, terrible balance. Standing in the marble-floored lobby of Rising Tide Development's headquarters, I felt that same pregnant stillness, that same electric anticipation of imminent collapse. The security guard recognized me, of course. In Seattle's architectural circles, I was still royalty, even if my crown had grown heavy with the weight of betrayal. Mr. Morrison, he nodded, barely glancing at my contractor's badge, another piece in the elaborate construct of my revenge, laid like foundation stones over months of careful planning. The elevator carried me upward, each floor marking another step in my ascension from victim to victor. In my briefcase, I carried enough evidence to shatter James Connor's empire, proof of systematic corporate espionage, psychological manipulation, and financial fraud that would make the FBI's white-collar division salivate. But it was the other file, the one containing psychiatric records and therapy notes, that carried the true demolition charges. I found Luna exactly where I expected, Connor's private conference room, bent over architectural plans like a priestess studying sacred texts. The sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows caught the silver in her hair, strands I'd watched appear over 25 years of shared mornings, now shining like threads of betrayal woven through our history. "The load-bearing calculations are wrong," I said quietly, watching her freeze like a deer-scenting predator. "But then, they were never meant to be right, were they?" She turned slowly, her face a masterpiece of conflicting emotions, fear, defiance, recognition, and something deeper, more primal. "Daniel." My name on her lips sounded different now, stripped of the artificial warmth she'd been manufacturing for months. "How did you get in?" "The same way you did, originally. Through the front door, wearing a mask of legitimacy." I placed my briefcase on the conference table, its soft thud echoing like a judge's gavel. "Though your mask was considerably more intimate." Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the back of a chair. "You don't understand." "Actually, I understand everything now." I began laying out documents like playing cards in a game of psychological solitaire. Dr. Matthews wasn't just a therapist, was he? He was Connor's architect of manipulation, specializing in reconstructing memories, rewriting personal histories. "Tell me, Luna, when did you start believing that our marriage had always been unhappy? When did they convince you that every moment of joy we shared was actually quiet desperation in disguise?" Color drained from her face as she recognized transcripts of her therapy sessions, each page a blueprint of her psychological reconstruction. "How did you get these?" "The same way Connor got to you, by finding the weak points in someone's professional armor. The difference is, I did it to expose truth, not construct lies." I moved closer, close enough to smell her perfume, still Chanel No. 5, but now it carried the metallic undertone of fear. "They didn't just seduce you, Luna. They deconstructed you. Rebuilt you into a weapon aimed at my heart." The door opened behind me, right on schedule. James Connor strode in, his confidence faltering microscopically as he registered my presence. "Daniel. This is unexpected." "Is it?" I turned to face him, feeling Luna's presence behind me like a heat signature. "Or is it the inevitable conclusion of a game you started 5 years ago when I refused your partnership offer?" His smile was architect perfect, designed to disarm and deflect. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "Save the performance." I activated my phone's speaker function, and Agent Wells's voice filled the room. "Federal agents are currently executing search warrants at all Rising Tide development locations. Mr. Morrison, do you have eyes on Connor?" The transformation was magnificent, watching Connor's carefully constructed facade crumble like a building whose foundation had been strategically undermined. But it was Luna's gasp that twisted something in my chest, a sound of genuine shock that suggested not all her reactions had been programmed. "You've been dissolving shell companies all week," I told Connor, watching realization dawn in his eyes. "Transferring assets, preparing for a strategic retreat. But you forgot the first rule of architecture: always check what's beneath the surface. Every account you moved funds into, monitored. Every overseas contact you reached out to, compromised. You tried to demolish my life, James. I decided to return the favor." He lunged for the door, but security, my security, borrowed from the FBI, was already there. As they led him away, I turned back to Luna, who had sunk into a chair, her perfect posture finally broken. "The therapy records," I said more gently, "show systematic manipulation. Drugs in those post-session relaxation teas. Subtle hypnotic techniques. They didn't just encourage your dissatisfaction, they manufactured it." Rebuilt your memories of us piece by piece until the reality they needed became the only reality you could see. Tears carved paths down her cheeks, each one like a crack in a facade revealing the authentic pain beneath. I remember being unhappy, she whispered. I remember feeling trapped, suffocated. You remember what they built for you to remember. I sat across from her, maintaining professional distance despite the gravity of 25 years pulling at me. The question is, what do you want to remember now? She looked up, really looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw my Luna there, not Connor's construction, but the woman who had once laughed at my terrible architecture puns and danced with me in empty construction sites. I want. She hesitated, touching the silver necklace she still wore, Connor's first gift, now revealed as the first link in a chain of manipulation. I want to remember the truth. Whatever it is. I placed a card on the table between us, not one of the damning documents, but a simple business card. Dr. Sarah Winters. She specializes in recovering from psychological manipulation. In rebuilding authentic memories. I stood, straightening my tie. The choice to seek help is yours. Just like the choice to believe in us was yours, once, before they rebuilt your reality. As I walked out, leaving her with the scattered evidence of her deconstruction and reconstruction, I felt something shift inside me, not the hard satisfaction of revenge accomplished, but a softer, more complex emotion. I had destroyed Connor's empire, yes, but in doing so, I'd also created space for something new to be built. Whether Luna would choose to be part of that construction remained to be seen. Outside, Seattle's eternal rain had finally stopped. The air felt cleaner, charged with possibility. I looked up at the skyline I'd helped create, each building a testament to the principle that had guided both my professional and personal resurrection. Sometimes, the most powerful act of creation begins with a calculated act of destruction. Agent Wells was waiting by my car. Connor's singing like a bird. The whole network's coming down. I nodded, watching the sun break through clouds, casting new shadows across familiar structures. And the therapy records? Inadmissible in court, she smiled grimly, but devastating in the court of corporate opinion. His reputation's finished. I got into my car, thinking of Luna's face in that final moment, confused, hurt, but real in a way she hadn't been in years. The architect in me knew that some structures, once compromised, can never be fully restored. But as I drove away from the ruins of Connor's empire, I realized that perhaps the true measure of an architect isn't just what he can build or destroy, it's knowing when to create space for something entirely new to emerge from the ashes of what was lost.